That's through audio live.
Oh, it's through the thing. Got you. All
Yep.
right.
What's going on, beautiful J4 family? Welcome to another edition of J4 Conversations. This just happens to be a J4 solo dolo with my dear friend, the one and only Dr. Keon McGuire. What's good, Key? You well?
All good, Elder AJ. What I'm gonna call you now. That's cool. It's cool for me to.
As is
That's
customary,
good.
we have a
That's
little
custom.
music to kind of help set the stage as we come on in.
Sure.
This is a conversation called Black Fatherhood in the Modern Era. For those of you coming on in, welcome. Good to see you. If you feel like you want to let yourself know that you're here, we'd love to know who we're chopping with. Again, as you come in, hit that like button on YouTube. Hit that subscribe if you haven't already. Share this outward with your beautiful community and definitely make some comments. We'd love to have your participation in this conversation as well. It's a beautiful night, y'all. Beautiful night. Thursday, I know we're competing with the Cardinals game. My apologies, beautiful family. But hey, it's important that we keep this J4 conversation out in the forefront. This is an edition called Father Conversations. It's the second one we're doing. Hey, Dr. Went, number one ambassador. How are you? You know Doc. Doc's in the house.
What's going on, Dr. Went?
Beautiful family, come on in. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe. Hit that share. Make those comments. All right. Without further ado, welcome to another conversation with two fathers just chopping up about this beautiful thing called life. And today we have a very, very special guest. And when I say that, I mean this individual and I connected upon his arrival to Arizona State University. Both he and I are doing work within the Black male space there. And he came in and added to my practitioner side in terms of higher education. He brought an intellectual component. He brought a research component, philosophy, theory, and took kind of what we're doing and what we know intuitively. He put it into narrative context, into theoretical context, and always ensured that we were doing things with the context of research, with the context of study. And so, beautiful young folks in the audience, beautiful J4 family, please welcome by a round of finger snaps, applause, likes, comments, whatever, Professor of Higher Education, Post-Secondary Education, Dr. Keon McGuire. Beautiful human being. How you doing, brother?
I'm good, brother AJ. I appreciate the invitation. And I got the utmost respect for your intellectual work in the community, on the digital space now and beyond. So I appreciate the invitation.
Man, beautiful, man. Thank you. It ain't about me. Tonight's about you, your journey, man. I know you're a young father. You've always been intentional about father, and I definitely want to talk about that. But let's go ahead and introduce you to the people. Sure. Key, tell us where you're from, kind of what's your profession, what you do, and then your children, how old are they, those kind of things.
No doubt. So originally from Wilmington, North Carolina. So it's right in the southeast of North Carolina. My family has been there maybe 5 or 6 generations now, but they go back to Sumter, North Carolina, and I've been doing doing some ancestry work, and I was able to get all the way back to the last generation in slavery, and then first freed recently. So that's been a journey. I was in North Carolina before going to graduate school, where I did my doctoral studies in higher education, Africana studies, in Philadelphia at the University of Pennsylvania. I was there for 5 years. Then I've been here at Phoenix since I joined the faculty in the Teachers College at ASU since 2014, when my partner Masquetta and I moved here, and she's on the faculty in the School of Human Evolution and Social Change. So we've been here. This is our 8th year now, I think, or 7 years, and trying to do our best to make it home, and for us with our community, and then more recently with our child, our son Malcolm Rai Zakru McGuire, who will be 3 in December. So that's our first child. So it comes with all the anxieties, the learning. Let's say the learning.
Right.
because
Right.
I was
Everything's
learning.
urgent. Everything's urgent
Yeah,
with this
yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah, you know, any little hiccup, any little kind
Yeah.
of change in crime pattern behavior, you're gonna spend a lot of money at the urgent care, realizing you didn't need to go.
You know
So you
about
from the
that.
South, huh, brother?
Yes, sir. Yep, yep. From the South, and uh, yeah, so much in that. Yeah, but I'm from the South. Always South. I'm Southern in my roots, both my pace, I think. You know what I mean?
Yep.
That kind of ethic growing up where folks tell you, just keep the main thing the main thing. So I don't feel like or I try not to always be enticed by like the shiny, you know what I'm saying, things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's a grounding that I'm thankful for my family giving me that.
No, beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
Welcome, Miss Mimi in the house. Good to see you all. For those of you joining us, thank you so much. We're here with Dr. Keon McGuire. Your son's name's Malcolm, huh?
Malcolm.
Is that a homage to El Haj Malik?
Absolutely. You see the beard.
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't get this the goatee. I had the goatee first. Um, and I didn't get that until years after reading the book.
Mm-hmm.
But I was actually out of college maybe. But with that, we were thinking of names, but to be quite frank, so a little bit of a backstory. I grew up Pentecostal Christian, and actually my brother and I were more so involved in the church before my parents were. And you know, by the time I ended up reading Malcolm X, where I took it seriously, I might have been in college. I must have come across it at some point in high school.
Mm-hmm.
I,
Mm-hmm.
I knew the movie. I watched the movie, the Spike Lee movie,
Right.
and I remember watching it a couple of times and that being powerful. But I never read the autobiography itself until I was a junior in in college, and it was the first time that I think I have the word. I'll describe it this way now, even though I couldn't describe it then. It was it was one of the more like unflinching and uncompromising critiques of racism or white supremacy I'd ever read. Like someone talking so direct.
The
Um,
autobiography?
the autobiography, yeah, yeah. I just felt like I never heard someone talk so without any reservation, right? But it still felt like it was still rooted in a lot of love. Then there was the discipline that I was attracted to. I grew up in Taekwondo from about age 8 to 16, so I'd already had some of that kind of propensity, I guess, towards discipline. But the kind of spiritual discipline, the selflessness, the service to others, and then the commitment to study, all those things I think were just things I was just drawn to. And so yeah, I always have been drawn to Malcolm, and in my head, I thought, if we were to have a child or a son, I would want to name him Malcolm. Unfortunately, what I'm saying, my partner, she was on board with it, so that wasn't too much of a hard convince. But
No, man.
yeah, so much of Malcolm still, and for you too, right? I
Yeah.
would imagine.
Yeah, El
How
Haj
was that?
Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X. I remember reading that, 19 years old, sitting out in front of the
Hmm.
Union. It was for a biracial kid trying to anchor and understand a black masculinity. At that time and era, he was a hell of a representation. I was equally drawn to Dr. King beyond I Have a Dream. He is much more prolific than that. But then Malcolm had that counter voice, right? And
Yeah,
strong recommendation for those of y'all listening in. If you haven't read it, I don't care how old you are, 60, 70, granddad who's in the house, good to see you. Read that book. But
yeah,
definitely young men, he's a literary ancestor, that had a major impact on black male sense of self and purpose, at a time where blackness was really literally being terrorized, if you look at the 50s and the 60s. Now, Key, you talked about what's your
yeah,
son's full name? There's a
yeah.
cultural
So it's
name, right?
yeah, so it's Malcolm Rai, and then his last name is hyphenated. So Zakru is my partner's her dad's last name, and McGuire is my last name. So we gave him the hyphenated last name. That's probably that's probably one of those things you'll put in the modern era too. Both of us kept our last names, and then we were trying to figure out like, well, how did we do with his last name? So we decided to go with the hyphenated last name. Yeah,
Boy, you real modern, brother. Got the
yeah,
hyphenated
yeah,
last name. I see you. I see
yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Beautiful folks. Y'all feel free to chime in here in the comments if you want to. To the cultural name,
Mm,
we put a cultural name in all of our children's name. as a way of anchoring them almost in birth certificate that they are of a cultural handoff, right? You know, and that in their name, it'll evoke an alignment with culture and community. So for you, by putting not only the hyphen, but a cultural component, what does that symbolize for you and for your wife?
Yeah, so I think so. One, and probably more so or equally as important for her. We even with the last name we started with Zakru because we were worried like if he goes to school and they, if they teach him to write his last name and they think it's too long and McGuire is first and is the more American name or more mainstream name, they'll be more likely to teach him that. So we
Mhm.
also wanted him to know, like you said, like kind of the history that he comes from, the people that he's connected to.
Right.
And I think, as Mesky always says, like, because that Ethiopia will always be home for her. We want him to have some sense of that connection to home. And the other part of it, with that is, uh, well, I'll say a funny story, even because we found out Malcolm was easier. We were getting a routine of just calling him Malcolm,
Mm-hmm.
and he wasn't. And he hear us call each other by one name, Baba, Mama, Malcolm. So I started telling him to call me Baba Keon, Mama Mesky, and then him Malcolm and Ai, so he can get in the habit of the two names. So now when people ask him his name, it's Malcolm and Ai, But
Mm-hmm.
then there was also that it's like that's gonna be easier, but we got him calling by first name. You know what I'm saying? So like we need to get in and
Mm-hmm.
out of that real
Mm-hmm.
quick.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that was a part of it. The other part too was, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit. The we wanted we didn't want it to be like kind of him only carrying my last name, right? Which this is our a small way of us trying to signal to him of, what patriarchy is, trying to disrupt some of that early, so that
Mm-hmm.
he is already kind of normalized for him that we have different names, but we're still family.
Right.
That he comes from both of us, and that there's different ways of relationship. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah,
That's why so many parents take so much time going through names, right?
yeah,
Because it's the first gift that you literally can give your child,
mhm,
and it can do one of two things. It can harm them if you pick a silly name.
mm,
It can be neutral and get no power from it,
yeah,
or every time they see it or pronounce it or introduce themselves, it can be a declaration of presence, right?
right, right,
It can
right,
be an assertion of who I am, and that's why names are so critical. And when families take time to think about the name, the power of the name, the meaning of the name, the family connection of the name, and then if you are so oriented to put a cultural component in that
yeah,
right from the beginning is to sort of make a statement against the absence of cultural esteem uplift,
yeah,
particularly within K-12 environments. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah. And that's when so I mean I was kind of looking away because I was trying to make sure I was going to translate this right. I'm thinking I'm gonna still get it off a little bit, but you know, uh, Mexican, I think about names a little different. So I think of Malcolm as a way of this is a representative of what's tied to me,
Hmm.
so that he might one day see something that resonated with me that he might revisit and figure out
Hmm.
to learn something about me,
Hmm.
right? As much as it is a maybe they're trying to learn something about himself by reflecting on our relationship over time. For
Hmm.
Mesky, she sees it as something to grow into. So Rai means like vision, I think, or one who sees, and even like prophecy. So for her, that name represents kind of what she hopes for him, right?
Hmm.
As much as it is, and less of a reflection to some degree about a connection for herself. It's a gift, like you were saying, right?
Hmm.
And so I
Hmm.
think we both we had a lot of conversations about that piece in particular. It was like, how do we see the names? Do we see it as something he needs to live up to? Because I kind of worried about that for a second with Malcolm,
Huh.
right? There's a way about that part. The beautiful part though is, when we talk, especially among the black folks, well, what's his name? Malcolm, strong name. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's already that type
Yeah.
of
Yep.
like what you're talking about, that the cultural connection, and there's like some, there's a different vibration of what's
Right.
happening in that
Right.
moment.
Right.
So yeah.
Yep. Hey, names are critical, family. Y'all checking in. Take some time with those names and give your child one that has meaning, longevity in the moment, as well as something they can build into. So let's stay with you, Doc.
Okay.
What era did you grow up in, and was your pops in the picture?
Yeah. So I grew up. So I'm born '86. So I'm one of what's I guess considered the older millennial side. I was
Mm-hmm.
I came of age with the internet. We still had some floppy disk and AOL was starting, but I
Yeah,
still,
yeah,
but at
yeah.
the same time, I'm coming of age with like the CD players and moving, uh, but technology is growing so fast at this time. So there's a way in which the technology stuff is intuitive to me, not in the same way as people who might have been on a later millennial side.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I grew up, yeah, late '80s, early '90s. So culturally, like we're marketing it by TV shows and stuff that, which looking back, I'm like I'm not sure. We joke about if I should have been seeing this, but I grew up with the Def Comedy Jam. I can remember as a
Yeah,
kid,
yeah,
the
yeah.
Martin Show,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Cross colors.
Cross Colors. I wore my stuff backwards.
Mm-hmm.
And then the movies, South Central, Boys in the Hood, Menace to Society.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm gonna get you, sucker, coming to
Okay.
America. So
Right.
that's kind of situates. But then at this, I'm also growing up in a multi-generational home with my grandmother at one point, and so I'm also just around elders. So I'm also watching a little bit of Sanford and Son,
Mm-hmm.
that's
Mm-hmm.
as well. And so when I was born, my mom actually had was got pregnant with my twin brother and I. Her sec After her second year, during her second year of college when she was at Fayetteville State University.
Okay.
And she came back home to Wilmington, North Carolina. She ended up finishing her degree at Shaw University Satellite School, and she came back home, and we were raised for the first 8 years with my mom and my grandmother and her younger brother,
Okay.
so my uncle. So we grew up, real tight. And then my mom married my stepdad when I was 8, and they're still together.
Okay.
Um, and then so my biological father and I, our relationship, was touch and go. And I've been at the point for quite a while. I don't, what's the word? Like, there's no judgment there. I
Okay.
think like him, like many other black men of his generation, got caught up in stuff. And he did. I wouldn't even say if it's the best he could because I don't know. I don't know that for him to give that
Right.
estimation. But I know that is not his situation is not unique,
Mm-hmm.
right? This is
Mm-hmm.
not an outlier from when he grew up, where he grew up, what
From the
resources he
times.
had,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, and what resources he had access to or didn't have access to, right?
Right.
But yeah, but we, yeah,
So
that's a good question.
so
Yeah,
you had three generations early
yeah,
on. You had your uncle there, and then
yeah,
a grandma figure, mom figure,
yeah,
and then mom remarried. So you had an example around 8, which is still developing, of a father example. But then you had this in and out, which is biological.
yeah.
What how has how has your life lived as a son, observing parent, absent a parent, step parent, biological parent away? How's that impacted your parenting style now? How's that influenced your parenting now?
Yeah, and I want to one other thing I want to say is when I mentioned Taekwondo earlier, the person who was my Taekwondo instructor later became my godfather and my pastor for years, and I call him Pops.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I met him also around this. I met him at 8 too, and we used to spend so much time together. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
everything from like gardening to, like I said, Taekwondo to just doing errands. I was his armor bearer for a while in the church. So, I call him Pops because of, that reason, because he's,
Right.
it's like a father figure, and still close, still a lot of love. Um, so I would say though, AJ, my fault. Your question was, how do those things impact how I
Yeah.
am as a parent, right?
Right. So, side note,
Yeah,
particularly single parents, single
yeah,
mothers, it's important to have a male balance, right?
Yeah.
And if that present isn't in the house, Dr. McGuire is pointing out ways in which you can have male mentoring, male care, elder provision, in terms of modeling and support, can come from a number of involved activities. And for you, Key, it was in the dojo. But how did your connection to male figures at a young age influence your parenting today?
Yeah, so I think try to say it short because I want to see if you want to ask a follow up that might take us somewhere.
Okay.
Because I would describe for a long time my goal was trying uh, to not be what my let's say biological father wasn't going to
Mm-hmm.
be absent. You know what I mean? It was, and it wasn't out of hate, but I feel like for particularly for black men, young men growing up in working class, poor communities, and then if I was always did well in school. I played ball. It was always like you're gonna be somebody. You know what I mean? But to
Mm-hmm.
be somebody was a very it's a little Obama before Obama, but
Yeah.
it was Obama.
Respectability politics.
There you
Yeah.
go. Right, right.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm in the South too, right? So, that's extra heavy.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think I was trying to do that, and I almost felt like I almost felt like I was missing a model. Like I felt like I had to find. I was filling pieces and stuff, and it took me a while. A lot of time in Philadelphia, a lot of my engagement, to be quite honest, with feminist perspectives, women of color perspectives, different ways of thinking about masculinity, where I realized that so much of my parenting style was given to me from my grandmother and my mother.
Right.
You know what I
Right.
mean?
That's what was there.
And so I kind of begin to almost think about it as kind of shift just a little bit from like uh, what does it mean for me to be a parent, as much as and a little less about what it means to be a father. You know what I'm saying? If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's been kind of my goal, or my kind of my north star as of recent. I do think that there's some things that I still need to. There's still some kind of cultural and societal expectations about what it means to be a black man that sometimes I'm not always able to kind of read between. Come to you a lot of times for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
To figure
Mm-hmm.
out what are the expectations that people have of us,
Mm-hmm.
and so yeah, so I was summing up that way. I went from trying to figure out a way to replicate exactly what I thought I shouldn't be, to realize that I had some resources and I could just pull from different places. So from my stepdad, my mom, my grandmother, um, from my pops, right, and other folks. Yeah,
So if I heard you correctly, and it's profound that rejecting is not the best word, but you found sort of gaps in trying to live up to father, which is male context, right?
yeah,
And that if you went to its highest level, and it also then means men and women, mom and father and
yeah,
mother, and then also it sort of is not, it doesn't carry the luggage of hypermasculinity. And
yeah.
for you, it kind of answered the question of how you wanted to approach parenting, to not couch it in fatherhood, but couch it in parenting.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a brilliant way of like summing it up. And there's still some times though that were even um uh I think for me it just gave me the creativity
Yeah,
to
yeah.
feel a little, to just to
Hmm.
create, to in the jazz tradition, to improvise from tradition,
Hmm.
right? So I
Hmm.
still know that there's things that even I'm not even always aware of,
Hmm.
that I need to listen and talk to folks who've been in my position, and then at the same time I can create from that, right?
Yeah,
Uh, yeah,
I was gonna say our title is Black Fatherhood in the Modern Era. I think you've
yeah.
just touched on something that's very unique to this era. I got my old man. He's here today. He
How
has
you doing, pops?
perspective. It's a good friend, Pop, Dr.
Yeah,
McGuire. And then I have my perspective, which probably leans, I'm born in 1968 and have a
yeah,
mindset of that generation. But in the modern era, as men and women, particularly as conversations grow around identity and gender and sexuality and all
yeah,
those kind of things, that even as one approaches fatherhood, it's understandable that a more modern generation might might reject the rigidity of that, right?
Yeah.
Or the box of that. And then
Yeah.
you got parenting responsibility. So parenting and whatever that evolution of growth is to include masculine and feminine entities, that's deep.
Yeah.
That's deep,
And I,
Keys. So
yeah,
tied to that, you're from the South. I
from
don't
the
know if
south.
your mom, you said your mom had some education, but here you are in
Yeah.
PhD, doctorate of philosophy, which means
Yeah.
original content created.
Yeah.
How is your education and your job, your profession, how does that creep into your parenting?
Yeah. And I think it's that's a good question. Is it might be a little bit more of the other way, if I'm being honest, where I think
Okay.
I'm trying to how would I say it? I think sometimes in the academy there's this like you have to be right certain forms of it. Let's say the big A academy, Western kind of knowledge traditions. Everything is either or instead of both and. And I think my upbringing, my the experience I'm having as parents and or as a parent, there's much more appreciation for the gray. I think it's also much more appreciation for trying to um, what I say like is to not run away from the contradictions,
Mm-hmm.
but be with the contradictions, right? And to also hopefully the work that I do will meet people where their contradictions are, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I've never been necessarily interested in producing uh, like scholarship or theories that try to tell people, particularly when I'm talking to Black folks, right? And the work, I hope my work is speaking with Black folks, particularly this work. Um, is it's not from place of judgment, right? Like as a place of almost like I explained it the other day as a place of innocence. I'm over here, I know what I'm talking about. You need to
Mm-hmm.
get it right, and it will meet
Right,
someone.
right, right.
What I'm saying is we all got contradictions, and then how can we how can my scholarship better, which I think I'm getting better at, show that type of unsettledness, right? So even with so I'll talk real quick about the work around the spirituality piece, and we can maybe talk later about some of the masculinity piece.
Okay.
But when I started, I didn't do research. My dissertation was on religion and looking at the intersection with race and gender and
Okay.
sexuality. I didn't want to do it for a long time because I was so worried that if I said something that might come off as critical to people who love me, I didn't
Mm-hmm.
want them to read something and feel hurt by it because
Yeah,
I share the
yeah,
stuff with them. And
yeah.
I don't think, and I don't have, and I'm not, that's one of the first audiences that I think about, right?
Yeah, that
Um,
mama.
that's right. That's right. So with, so for me, I stayed away from it for a long time. But what I was interested in the work with some of what we're talking about is how religion or spirituality, either in an explicit way, like if you're participating in faith traditions, or for us as Black folks is always, or many times there's religion and spirituality always around, even if it's not named. How do those things make us, what do they make us think about gender, right? And for me that was, I grew up in the Pentecostal church where it was a discussion about women uh, preaching or being pastors. And when I first started in the child joke with my mom, and them, they used to go to the beach with jean skirts all the way down to the ankles. Women couldn't, at certain places, women couldn't wear jewelry or makeup or do stuff to their hair. And growing up with being close to my mother and my grandmother in particular, that never set well with me. But there was two things I was always kind of nervous to ask the question because I was wondering where it would lead me out of a sense of like psychological home or cultural home. But then I also knew that I wanted to ask the questions. I just didn't know where I can go for different possibilities, right? And that's where Philadelphia really comes into play as far as providing some different models for what that can look like. Um, Still with the seeds, right, of what my family gave me. I just think it looked different in a different, in a different environment. Philadelphia is a very
Mm-hmm.
different city
Mm-hmm.
than Wilmington.
No, that's heavy, but I would think our parents, regardless of generation, and as they mature and have wisdom too, they know the world is different, and
Yeah.
and, and I think they would have mad respect for a younger eyes of high intellect offering critique.
Mhm.
It might rub some feathers depending on how strong the faith is, right? But
Right.
but uh I would invite you, Key man, to just write uncensored, and to trust the love, care that's always been shown for you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I appreciate that, AJ.
yeah, no, heavy. Let's talk about that. Religion. What's your stance? Do you teach your children your faith, or do you share, which is slightly different, with your
Yeah.
children your faith, and then let them kind of land wherever they might land? What's your thoughts there?
I have zero idea. I mean, one of the things that helps, right, is we kind of out here um, away from family, so there's less of an immediate kind of pressure or pull. But we have these conversations. You know what I mean? We don't always agree, but we have them. Sometimes it's a joke here and there. Sometimes it's a more serious conversation.
Mhm.
But we at least now have the space to do that because I had some conversations with my mom and with my family just about where I stand a little bit. The other thing that helps is I'm not I don't neither one of us like practice, like we don't go to church
Mhm.
or to synagogue or mosque or anything. So we're right now we've kind of almost uh, been given a pass. But what we have talked about are one of the things we did before Malcolm was born. I was kind of resistant to because I'm like I don't like home don't people giving me homework, but
Mhm.
we had a doula,
Yeah.
Afro-Cuban sister, super dope out here, and we did some meetings with her before Malcolm was born. I was mainly interested in the birthing process, but what she would
Right.
ask us to do is, what were traditions you were raised with that you want to pass on? What were, kind of big T traditions, small T traditions? What are things that you remember about your childhood that brought you joy that you want to also do for your child? Are there examples of parenting? This stuff, and what that made us do was to have a conversation essentially about, well, what are the principles we want to share, and then how do we share them? Because for both of us, um, you know, religion or spirituality was a way that we learned some of these principles of sacrifice, of giving back, of esteeming your brother or sister higher than yourself, pride coming before fall. So the importance of humility, um, you know, uh, brotherhood. What's the verse? The brotherhood is like flowing down the beard, like all this stuff around community. So there's so much about principles that even though I don't practice still, that like that still ground me in how I experience the world. My belief
Yeah.
in the spiritual power, and
Hmm.
I just don't know how to. I don't know. The short answer is I don't know how to translate that in a way, in a formal way. Maybe this gets to even your rites of passage conversation. But what's
Yeah.
your thoughts about it? What's your thoughts about that?
Well, I think Sweet Hugh is 62. My dad, he said in there, teach principles and your children will decide, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
If you peel it back, whether it's Western religions or Eastern religions or whatever the various faiths are, fundamentally at their core, they do teach or underscore values and
Yeah.
underscore principles, right? And to the point to where if you look across faith, what do they have in common? They have disagreement in prophet, they have
Hmm.
disagreement in origin story, they have different agreement in ritual, but they have common agreement around principle, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so for me, similar to you, we try to teach good character, uh,
Hmm.
and we
Hmm.
try to teach or provide examples of decency,
Hmm.
and then once you've laid that foundation, let them become what they're going to become, whether that's adherence to a structured religion or whether it's a way to walk in the world, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um, but I think it's the values piece, which goes back to a piece, and we talk about this with the rites of passage conversation. We do have to be intentional with the instruction at some point.
Hmm.
They'll pick it up through observation, which is one of the main ways babies learn. But there needs to be some ritual, and I always say the dinner
Yeah.
table is the greatest
Mm.
pulpit, or the dinner table is the greatest classroom, right? But it's through those early on conversations where you can introduce the values, the principles of the family, and by extension, the child takes that on, and they will then ebb and flow in terms of what they take on, what they disagree with at some point. But a main parental responsibility is to intentionally share principles through structured kinds of ways. And we talk about that in our rites of passage on J4 Conversations. Y'all go check it out.
Right.
Key,
I'm with that.
You for that?
No, I'm with that. I'm listening. That's what I'm listening. I'm telling you, I don't know.
No, yeah, and that's a wonderful father tip, y'all. I don't know. I don't know. Fathers don't come inherently with an instruction. In fact, that's my next question. Jill Went, Dr. Went says she agrees with Granddad. Setting a foundation for knowing how to treat people with kindness and teaching them self-worth will lead them as young adults to be grounded in those things. Love.
Yeah.
Brother, do you feel you've been trained to be a father? How have you been trained?
Yeah, so two caveats before I respond. I'm gonna probably meander around this question a little bit. So one is my grandmother, Mama Love. She reminded me once Malcolm was born. She was like, one day we were driving back from college. Like for some reason, her and I were driving back from college from Winston-Salem back to Wilmington, and I told her, which I don't remember, that I wasn't gonna. I hope I wouldn't become a father until I was absolutely ready to be like locked in. You probably see this too sometimes, right? Like I'm like people ask me, "Can you do?" I'm like, "Nah," because I'm in that still in that phase. I'm still trying to work through. So I would say that the training, which goes back to what your pop said, what Dr. Wynn said, was in the principles of what my family taught me. I actually wrote something recently. I was talking about my grandmother, Mama Love, where I wrote the story about how love was my family inheritance that I'm supposed to carry on. So all the stories she told me about folks who came before was one, how they stood up against folks, right?
Right.
When they was doing wrong, but then how they also looked out for people. So there's always those stories. You stood up when people weren't being treated right. You stood up for yourself. You was always respectful, but you maintain your dignity. And you also, if you have something, you always share, right? And so looking back, I watched that, and then I would say the other stuff around the patience. Like I said, I was talking to my grandmother last night, and what we talk about, our relate how we think about children. I realize my approach is from my grandmother is like, things are things. She's always said that things are things. But human beings, are fragile, right? We have to be. Those are the children of whom we have to be careful with, and not these possessions that we have. So she's the one who taught me patience. She's the one who taught me really what I realize now. I want to kind of want Malcolm to have a curiosity about the world that I realized I got from her. Right?
Yeah.
She's like, let's kind of follow children's agency, right? Of course within some boundaries. So a lot of that, for her and then my mom, was always the family came first, right? She even, didn't take certain professional opportunities because she wanted to be home. I also learned how to, if we would get into arguments, I would be mad at my mother, and let's say let's say she said something that hurt my feelings. I saw her model apologizing, right, in the moment, not waiting a long time to do it. I was wrong, and then closing that space. Those three things you told me: words, right? The words of affirmation, make sure they know how you feel. Close the space with the physical touch, and then being present. And those are, my mom was always big on the presence piece and the joy. She always tickled us. We always touched and hugged, all those things. And going back to me realizing like, oh, this is a part of my could be a part of my parenting model. Let me know that I can, I can that Malcolm and I can interact in that way, right? Where he feels my touch is something that's trusting and soft, and not something that he's afraid of. The majority of the work, honestly, was me. I was real anxious about having a child because I knew that even though I knew here that I didn't have to overcompensate for, say, what I didn't have my first 8 years and some other stuff. I knew that it would. I knew it here, but I was like, I know it's going to take me a while to really get that in practice because I have over 3 decades built up of saying, no, this is what you need to provide.
Mm-hmm.
So, and through therapy and talking to my therapist about it, I was even talking to my partner about it because she used to always say, I heard a lot of my friends are like, "You're great with kids. You're gonna be good." I was like, "It's not a. That's not the part.
Yeah.
The part is the anxiety and the fear of I can't control everything. I can't, always protect them
Mm-hmm.
from everything. Um, and so much of that was just the fear, which I
Mm-hmm.
there was certain stuff when Mesky was pregnant where she would be like, "No, why don't you talk to some and stuff?" And I'm like, "Well, I didn't know why." And then I realized like later, oh, I'm like, "Oh, this is like me being afraid of some,
Mm-hmm.
and very anxious
Mm-hmm.
about this responsibility I take very serious." And yeah, so I think that was the preparing part. I'm still kind of working through. I'm still learning that I don't have to. Uh, I can take time for myself, right?
Yeah.
That I
Yeah.
don't have to. When he was first born, I'm watching everything from like when his arm swings to see how his fingers
Mm-hmm.
move to see if he's going to sleep
Mm-hmm.
or tired yet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm watching the blinking of his eyes. All of those things, though, of course, made us closer, right? Because it
Right.
became like we were intuitive to one another. But in some level, it's also not sustainable, right?
Right.
It's not sustainable. So I'm still working through that part um, as far as the preparation that I don't. And I'm learning. Like I see people do it. It just, you know, I got to work. I think I have to work emotional, feeling like it's not me not being present.
Yeah. But
You
the
know what I
fact
mean?
that it's top of mind, Key, the
Yeah.
fact that this question of your son is top of mind ensures the best outcome, in my opinion.
Okay.
It's when we distance ourselves too far from our children
Mm,
that things are left kind of to their own ends.
yeah.
In many ways, I think fatherhood is about observation, which you talked
Mhm.
about. It's also about touch, play, ground play, tickle, right?
Yeah.
There's a little rough housing element that
Yeah.
fathers can have with their sons that actually helps them socialize
Yeah.
because they get a chance to test boundaries, those kind of
Yeah.
things. But also your words, that we kind of talked about, but also in sort of a metaphysical kind of way, but to think about where they're going in
Mhm.
your exercise of thinking about your baby and where you want them to go. You're in essence setting that in motion, man.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
so to think about your babies with uncertainty is healthy. I want to explore something we kind of talked about before we got on camera, and
Okay.
you talked about the fears or concerns we have for our children
Yeah.
and how your parenting is navigated by that. Would you be
Yeah.
comfortable sharing or speaking to that a
Yeah.
little?
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. So I think, and this might go back to kind of what a little bit of extension of our last conversation. Let me know too if I'm kind of hitting at what we were talking about.
Hmm.
Um, but we actually did this because when Malcolm turned 1 years old, he was uh, what's the word? Well, let me take a step back even before that. I used to have these grounding questions as a way to like deal with my own anxiety, stress. Just ask myself about three questions when I'm trying to figure out how to make a decision. But I realized, one of the hardest parts of transitioning with Malcolm was, everybody says you think about your child first, but I didn't really have a framework for me to get there.
Mm.
So, like one of the questions that I asked myself about him, does he feel this? I gave myself two questions, one that's hard for me, one that's easy. Because I used to just do the
Mm-hmm.
hard stuff and I would beat myself up all the
You
time.
stop there,
I
yeah,
couldn't do it. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So the easy one was, does he feel loved and does he feel beautiful? Right. So
Mm.
even that was kind of some gendered language that took, like, I knew I wanted to do it. But when I first started saying it, I called him gorgeous and beautiful and instead of handsome. And not
Mm.
even in a, and not in a, I wasn't initially doing it purposefully. It's just how I wanted to, talk to him. And
Mm-hmm.
there was cues from other folks, around trying to kind of change the language. And of course, I dug in a little bit more. But that was the thing, it's like, I want him, does he feel beautiful and loved? So how do I do that? I compliment him on his, see your hair, look at your hair, is just gorgeous. How does your hair look
Mm-hmm.
like that?
Mm-hmm.
All this stuff. So, and then the hard part is, does he feel that I'm present with him? because with just being tired with COVID and the stress, that was always remains a challenge. So does he, is it the eye contact there? Do I go into his world, long enough for him to feel like I'm actually there throughout playtime? That was a reorienting way of thinking about it as well. But when he turned a year old, we didn't have family here, but we did a big FaceTime. I mean, it was, I don't know, 15 people from both sides.
Yep.
But the other thing we did was uh, some of our folks here, some of our village, who some of Malcolm's, like a few aunties, maybe one of his uncles, but I think his aunties who could make it.
Yeah.
We all wrote this letter to Malcolm, and they didn't have
Mhm.
to read it. And folks, they were encouraged to use whatever their language is, because it was almost like a promise that they can be special between the two of them. And I
Mhm.
wrote one to Malcolm that was about, I think, some of the things that we were talking about before, which is I want him to know our presence is reliable and consistent.
Mhm.
I want him to know my touch is soft and restful, and my voice as comforting. And then for as long as possible for him to experience freedom. And I was using Nina Simone quote about, to be free is to have no fear,
Mhm.
and as a child, right? So for me, as a part of my role is to create as much space in the world for him to not be afraid. And that last piece is important for two reasons. One is, for me at least, is um, growing up, working class, poor communities in the South, I didn't realize like how much fear, like even now when I'm walking around a neighborhood, if I hear a noise, I'm always looking over
Yeah.
my shoulder.
Yeah.
There's a certain
Yep.
way
Yep.
that I just had to learn to move in the world, and I don't want him to have to live in that environment. In part, he's not even in that environment where he necessarily needs to live that way. I'm
Mhm.
trying to, like small example, and hopefully I'm not rambling too much, brother
No, you're
AJ.
right
But
there, brother. You're right there.
we go to when we pick him up on campus from school. Um, we go around campus for about 30 minutes, and I just let him roam.
Mhm.
And I had heard Lupe Fiasco. He was saying his father in Chicago would just stay about 10, 15 feet behind him and just let him go, always in his, but just let him explore. And I
Mhm.
maybe heard like 10 years ago, I was like, oh, that's powerful, right? And even looking at someone like Lupe, how he thinks, like his
Yep.
ability to, like, it's like this is someone who can touch and re-engineer things. And so for my job, is like if he's doing something that's safe, that's cool. But I want him to feel like he can freely explore the world. The other part is, I realized that for me, I feel like a lot of black men a generation before me, whether they wanted to or not, some of them wanted to, but some of them I think were called upon to do this kind of like disciplinary work,
Yep.
right? To be
Yep.
the disciplinary. And
Yep.
we see this even in education, right? Where oftentimes folks will expect us as black men to like come in and be like the strong, get the get the
Mhm.
black men under control, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so for me, I wanted to be the opposite of that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And for Malcolm, and what's interesting about this, my grandmother told me last night. We were just talking about raising some stuff, and she was like, I don't even know how we got there, but she was like, once a child is afraid of you, it's hard to come back from that
Mhm. Mhm.
because
And
it
that,
triggers something, right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and that is a style of parenting, right? Because
Mhm.
you're overemphasizing compliance, obedience,
Mhm.
respectability,
Mhm.
to the detriment of a balanced kind of a relationship to your children. In full disclosure, I have 6 kids, 31 to 17 years old. My older ones, I was much more discipline oriented,
Mhm. Mhm.
and that's impacted the relationship, especially
Yeah,
with the
yeah,
boys, to where the younger ones, to where I had kind of saw things and wasn't quite as obsessed, with being
yeah,
a good father, raising good children, but just kind of trusted that the family village, as you say, would produce healthy, grounded children. And so,
yeah.
yeah, that definitely has been the case. You know, you talk about fear, and
Yeah,
one of my questions is, has fatherhood changed over time? It absolutely has, and I want you
yeah.
to address this. But
Okay.
and a part of that is how we manage or remove the things that we had to manage or
Yeah.
navigate through, which have elements of fear. If you think about it, my dad's born in segregation. He's
Yep.
born he lives in a black city. He has this
Mhm.
interesting interpretation of whiteness. There's a vulnerability to it. I'm born in the 68. My biggest fear was
Mhm.
gang culture, right?
Mhm.
navigating Crips and Bloods in your high school environment. And so you were always mindful of the potential for physical threat, right? I'm not quite sure what my children's definition of fear, because I've tried to remove it out. But one thing that I always struggled with, and feel free to free and flow on this, is fearful of them being afraid. Keon, fearful of them being fearful, right? And I struggle with this, like around the when you come across a cop, the way we talk about it, you almost got to just terrorize yourself. I understand police brutality and the vulnerability upon Black bodies, but I don't want my children fearful because they drive around and they see cops. I don't want that popping in your head that may be careless, or what I'll call historical movies that for a period of time were just overwhelming, telling the story of chattel enslavement and segregation. I understand the historical context, but there's a part of me that pauses in terms of putting that in their spirit. They got to have an understanding of the history, but I don't want them to carry the luggage of white supremacy on their back. And I've always struggled with that balance. And that's kind of the last question. What's your thoughts there?
So I'm with this. I'll use the example of, let's say, the police, for instance. And me and Mesky have talked about this, because he's with all the toys and the TV shows, there's a police person everywhere, right? And I'm the same way. I'm like, I don't want him to have that response. Definitely not at this age, for him to know this. And, I think there'll be a time when I need to share some things with him, but I want it to be a time when he can comprehend him, where he's not reactive in the world. You know what I mean? And I think there's I think for me, and especially to his class position is not what I grew up with. So there's already some privileges of safety that he has access to that he doesn't know. And I had to learn, even subconsciously, that I don't need to that is just going to be different, right? And I'm not trying to he's not going to have the quote unquote like we just have different experiences. But I'm big on not wanting to be afraid. And what you were just talking about, the histories I grew up with as well, because when I was saying my family started in South Carolina, we moved because my grandmother's father was working for a white guy who didn't pay him. They get in an altercation. He has to leave that night. Right. These stories I'm learning are real common. They come looking for him that night. He's gone. Then my grandmother wasn't born yet, but her mother and the children who were born left. And this was a part of me looking back in the history, and come to find out the place where he was working was on a plantation. And my great grandmother used to always say that she her or her mother, maybe both of them, like, were around in slavery, and the dates never added up. I said, well, maybe it's, maybe that's off. But, what we know now about how slavery never really ended. And if they're living on a physical plantation with the same family who were, who were the plantation owners, and come to find out the guy he worked for, brother was one of the few white men that Martin Luther King Jr. named in a letter from Birmingham jail, who doesn't, in my opinion, talk enough about that side of the family, right? So I grew up hearing all this stuff and knowing about this stuff, right? The history of white terror, like how we got to North Carolina. I knew we had like kind of an uncle that we weren't sure where he was, and we weren't sure if a white family had taken him. All these things, and then the stuff, of course, is just growing up in a working class, environment with stuff. So for me, because of that, there's still some times where I move around in the world like this and a little bit reactionary. So I'm trying to balance. I want him to be free as possible. Also want him to have some kind of gender equity conscious where he doesn't take up too much space, right? As a man, or as a young boy. So I'm always trying to balance those things. But at this age, I'm more so on the side of be free, and if, so I'll watch him. If he's going to hurt himself, I'll let him hurt himself where it's not going to be too detrimental. Right. And we'll talk about it. How did that feel? Whatever. But you can try it. Take a risk. I remind, I'm not going to let you hurt yourself or hurt yourself too bad. Because I just think there's that's just that. Because even now I struggle with that. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's still like sometimes too much of a calculation
Mm-hmm.
in my movements, my tone of voice when I'm
Mm-hmm.
in certain places, how I sit. You know what I mean? Where you know,
Mm-hmm.
so I don't want him to have that. Yeah,
No, that's heavy. That's heavy, Keith.
yeah.
We are on top of our hour. We
Okay,
have a
I
question.
appreciate it.
No, no, man, this is beautiful.
Yeah,
We have a question in the box that I want to get to, and
sure.
then Key, I want to give you the last word. Beautiful J4 family. Hey, y'all like the YouTube channel, subscribe to it, comment and share with your people. We're trying to grow. We want to have many more conversations like this, examples of fatherhood. But also a part of why we do this is there's a problematic number in our community. 70% of Black children born to single mothers, 51% are born to homes without a father. And that's a challenge, that's a problem. And so moms, dads, we all can benefit from intergenerational conversations around fatherhood. And Key, this has been a hell of a one. So
Yeah.
please, y'all, help us get the word out. Thank you, Dr. Went, Dwayne, Mimi, all of y'all who have helped promote it. We need more ambassadors. Dr. Went asks, if there's time, a question for you both. In one word, what is the best quality or character trait do you bring into fatherhood for your children? What is the best quality or character trait that you bring into fatherhood for your children? One word.
Okay. You want to go first, or you want me to go first?
I'm thinking.
Okay. We can still pause for a second.
Mm-hmm. One word. Then
Go
we've
ahead and
been
do
talking
two.
an hour. We should have a word, right?
Go ahead and give him two. You probably because you probably got two or three. Go ahead and
Go
give him
ahead.
two. Oh, I was for me. It would be. I'm gonna give two. I'm gonna give two. So one would be love. The second, though, probably an example of that would be patience. Yeah.
Love and patience.
Yeah.
Huh. That's interesting. Presence comes to mind, but that's rather
Mm,
simplistic. Um, Intentionality would be
mhm,
my one word. I remember when I had my children, because I was married twice. My first child was pretty much raised by her mother and grandmother, and so I know the space of being an absent father,
mhm,
and I struggled with that. I failed my daughter in that regard. I failed her in that regard. Although she's PhD student,
yeah.
handling business,
Yeah. Yeah.
she gives me counsel at times. So
Mm,
her mother and grandmother did a great job, and then I was there, but intermittently. And so I made a promise that I would be present for my children, doctors, visits, games, all those kinds of things,
yeah.
even at my own sacrifice of interest, and that whatever dynamics going on in life, that it would take a whole lot of chaotic craziness for me to
Mm,
leave this situation.
mm,
And not just to be physically present, but to be intentional present, meaning always thinking about where they're at. I don't mean location, I mean stage
yeah.
of development, and what should we be doing right now to help them advance to the next stage of development.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that has obsessed my thinking, and it's even manifested in J4 conversations, this desire to stay in the fatherhood conversation. And that's in large part continuing the generational love and care that was modeled for me by my father.
Yeah. 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 That's
King,
deep.
the last word is
Yeah.
yours, brother. What you want to say to these beautiful people in J4 conversation land?
Well, first of all, thank you again for the invitation. As I said, I think we have a deep amount of respect and appreciation for what you do and who you are and how you show up. Um, More importantly, I think I always appreciate your ability to articulate what your position is and being open to engaging in folks who might have a different position, but then using that as a productive place, right? So, and probably my two things would be with that would be one is I think these type of conversations that are maybe more open to not trying to get to a definitive place, but
Mm-hmm,
bringing
mm-hmm,
folks together to realize, well, let's figure out how we're creative, how we improvise, how we can pull from each other, and
mm-hmm.
still, and a lot of the work I'm doing now really is around how do we heal from the wounds of patriarchy because we can't live up to it, right? Particularly, I think as a black man, it's always as something that's out of reach. And so I think there's that work is slow. That work is probably more is in community with some
Mhm.
accountability to one another. Um, and the second part, which is probably a place where I'm trying to go, which is, and I think I've talked to you about this before. Most of my kind of rethinking of gender still um, is rethinking this category of masculinity that's still sometimes a little male centric.
Mhm.
So I've even thought, like, so I thought about, I used to try to like not use son, I would say child, right?
Mm.
Because I'm asking myself, when I talk to her, what I'm aware of, like is this socializing him to feel like he has to express his gender in a certain way,
Mhm.
right? And then so that's one. So this is going back to the contradictions where I'm not running away from that, right? And I'm also
Mm.
not trying to be perfect or reach like a pure position. I'm simply trying to understand these are things I can work through. And so some of the conversations I've been trying to have more like kind of behind the scenes is with uh, you know, my trans family, my queer family, folks who, and these are people who I already have like, ongoing relationships with,
Mhm.
to figure out like, all right, I know I got some stuff, but what are some other ways I could think? And it's not even trying to like rush to a finish line. I'm just
Mhm.
open to learning, right? Like, what are
Mhm.
the possibilities there to do this
Mhm.
thing differently? And yeah, so that's a stretch area for me, right? That I'm still trying to figure out,
Brother
what that might mean. Yeah,
Key, that's gonna be a stretch area for the nation, man. We talked
yeah,
about Black fatherhood in the modern era, right?
yeah,
And then you talked about and you're in the academic space, but
yeah,
thinking about even how names and terminology might
yeah.
reinforce certain things, right? I certainly I call my children seeds, not for that reason,
Mm,
but it's interesting. It has some application.
yeah,
But as our generation, almost for your generation,
yeah,
and many times I just got to sit back and watch and try to understand. But your generation of fathering is also now dealing with a new cultural prioritization around
mm-hmm,
trans and gender and
mm-hmm,
sexuality, all those things. And then that inevitably creeps into, not creeps, but it influences how
yeah,
you parent, right?
yeah,
That is, we're not going to talk about it today. That
yeah,
is ripe for a future conversation.
yeah.
There's identity, nuance, and politics, but what is the greatest affirmation of what you believe on how you raise your children, right?
Right, right,
Mm.
right,
Mm.
right. Yeah,
We're going to
yeah.
stop it right
It's
there.
good. Stop right there. I
We're gonna
appreciate
stop
you.
it right there. Beautiful J4 family. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Y'all click that subscribe, do the notification thing so that you can know when we're gonna do this again in some other kind of forums. There's some great content on the site. Please check us out, but most importantly, help us get the word out. And more importantly, thank you all. Thank you for supporting these conversations. Dr. McGuire, Big Key, love you, brother.
Appreciate you. Love you, man. Love you.
Love you, brother.
All
All
right.
right, one, J4.